rain came down in sheets that Tuesday evening, the kind of relentless autumn downpour that turns city streets into shallow rivers and makes every traffic light bleed long red streaks across the wet asphalt. Clara Whitfield sat behind the wheel of her silver sedan, one hand gripping the steering wheel hard enough to whiten her knuckles, the other pressing her phone against her ear as she listened to her mother deliver the same speech she had already memorized. "The restaurant is wonderful," her mother was saying. "He comes from a very good family. Just give it one chance, sweetheart. Just one." Clara had stopped counting how many times she had heard that particular sentence. She had heard it applied to Marcus, the financial advisor who spent the entire dinner talking about his investment portfolio and nothing else. She had heard it applied to Derek, who had brought his mother along without warning and expected Clara to find it endearing. She had heard it applied to a rotating cast of men her mother had assembled with the sincere belief that proximity and candlelight would do what reason could not. And now she was hearing it applied to tonight's mystery candidate, a man her mother had described only as successful, thoughtful, and not at all like the others. Clara had long since learned that her mother's definitions of those words did not align with anyone else's dictionary. She ended the call with a practiced politeness that masked the low-grade dread pooling in her stomach, merged onto the rain-slicked boulevard, and told herself that she would sit through exactly 90 minutes of polite conversation, excuse herself gracefully, and be home by 9:30 with a glass of red wine and absolutely no regrets. She never made it to the restaurant on time, 3 blocks from the highway on-ramp, somewhere between a darkened row of closed boutiques and a shuttered parking garage. The engine coughed once, gave a sound like a man trying to suppress a sneeze, and died. The car rolled forward silently for another few yards before coming to rest against the curb, its hazard lights blinking an orange rhythm into the gray curtain of rain. Clara sat very still for a moment, convinced that sheer force of will might restart the engine. It did not. She tried the ignition twice, 3 times, heard only the polite clicking refusal of a battery doing its best. She said one word under her breath that she would not have used in front of her mother, then pulled out her phone and called roadside assistance. The automated voice informed her that a technician would arrive within 120 minutes. 120 minutes. She said the second word her mother would not have approved of, then sat back and stared through the rain-streaked windshield at a city that had absolutely no interest in her problem. For 11 minutes, no one stopped. Cars swept past in a continuous spray of dirty water, their drivers invisible behind fogged glass, each one making the unspoken calculation that this was not their problem tonight. A man walking a large dog crossed the street to avoid passing her. A couple with a shared umbrella walked close enough for Clara to make eye contact with the woman, who looked briefly sympathetic and then looked away. She was standing outside with the hood open. She had gotten out in the rain for 30 seconds to do that much, which had cost her the left shoulder of her blazer, and done nothing useful when she heard the slow rumble of wheels on wet pavement and turned to find a man pushing a large-wheeled janitor's cart along the sidewalk, his orange safety vest luminous under the streetlights, a bucket and mop secured with a bungee cord, a small toolbox sitting in the front tray. He was perhaps 35, broad-shouldered, unhurried, his dark hair damp from the rain and flattened against his forehead. He wore the kind of work clothes that said he had been wearing them since early that morning. Not dirty, not disheveled, but honest, lived in. He looked at the open hood, then at Clara, then back at the car with the calm, systematic gaze of a man who had solved problems before. "Trouble?" he said. It was less a question than an acknowledgement. Clara managed to convert her immediate assessment into something more civil than what her expression was probably broadcasting. "I have roadside assistance coming," she said. He nodded slowly, as though considering whether that information changed anything, and apparently decided it did not. "Do you mind if I take a look?" he asked. There was no performance in his voice, no effort to impress, no awareness at all of the fact that Clara Whitfield, senior marketing manager at Harlow & Associates, did not typically accept automotive assistance from men in orange safety vests on rainy sidewalks. Clara did mind. On some level she was not proud of. But she was wet. She was already late. and 117 minutes remained on the roadside assistance estimate. "Go ahead," she said, and stepped back. He crouched in front of the engine with the toolbox open beside him and began to work. Not tentatively, not experimentally, with the quiet confidence of someone who has done this particular thing before and found it interesting rather than bothersome. Clara stood a few feet away, checking her phone, watching rain drip from the brim of her hood, trying to calculate whether she could still make the reservation if this worked in the next 15 minutes. The man worked in silence for a while. Then, without looking up from the engine, he said, "First impressions are funny things. We make them before we even know we're making them." Clara was not sure whether he was talking to her or to the engine. She decided to treat it as a general observation and not respond. But he continued, mildly, "I'm not complaining. People do it to me all the time." He glanced up at her briefly, and there was something in his expression she could not entirely read. Not hurt, not accusatory, simply observant. Clara felt a small, uncomfortable flush of heat that had nothing to do with embarrassment and everything to do with the fact that he was not wrong. She had been doing exactly that. "I think that's just human nature," she said, which was the least defensible thing she could have said. And she knew it even as she said it. He considered this with what seemed like genuine fairness. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe it's a habit. Habits can change." Then the engine turned over, caught, and settled into its ordinary idle, as though nothing had ever been wrong. Clara blinked. She got in, revved it gently, listened to it purr. She got back out and looked at him with something close to genuine admiration. "Loose battery terminal," he said, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Common in the rain. Vibration loosens it over time." He closed the hood with a solid, satisfying click. She opened her bag and produced two $50 bills, a reflex. The kind of thing she did when someone performed a service, and she wanted the transaction clean and complete and finished. He looked at the bills without taking them. "That's all right," he said. She pushed them toward him slightly. "Please," she said, "it's the least I can do." He shook his head once, already moving to put the cloth back in the toolbox. "I was passing anyway," he said. "Go catch your dinner." Something about the way he said it made her lower the bills. She felt, strangely, that accepting her money would have cost him something, though she could not have explained what or why. She put the bills back in her bag and thanked him, and meant it without the performance she usually attached to that phrase. He nodded. Then he paused. He did not look at her with any particular drama or significance. He simply said, in the same unhurried tone he had used throughout, "Are you sure you want to go to this dinner?" Clara stared at him. "You've been checking your phone every 2 minutes, with the expression of someone walking toward a dentist's chair," he said. "I just figured I'd ask." The observation was so precise and so casually delivered that it bypassed her usual defenses entirely and landed somewhere in the middle of her chest. She felt a surge of something not quite anger, not quite recognition. "You don't know anything about me," she said, and heard, even as she said it, how thin the sentence sounded. He seemed to hear it too, but he didn't press the point. He nodded, as though she had said something entirely reasonable, and walked on into the rain with the same unhurried ease with which he had arrived. Clara stood on the sidewalk, watching the orange vest disappear into the gray distance, and told herself that the restless feeling in her chest was nothing more than the lingering adrenaline of a breakdown on a rainy night. She was wrong about that. But she would not find out how wrong for another 47 minutes. Clara arrived at Orison 15 minutes late. Her blazer still damp at the left shoulder, her composure reconstructed with the efficiency of a woman who had long ago learned to make any entrance look intentional. The restaurant occupied the ground floor of a converted warehouse in the Arts District, exposed brick, warmed by candlelight. Ceilings high enough to murmur rather than echo, a wine list that required a separate leather folder. It was exactly the kind of place her mother would choose. Beautiful, serious, aspirational. A place that asked you to rise to it. Clara handed her coat to the attendant and texted her best friend Renee a quick summary of the car situation adding the assessment that the lunch-pail philosopher who fixed her battery was honestly more interesting than this date would be, and let the host lead her toward the private dining room at the back. She had assembled a picture of tonight's unknown quantity from the minimal details her mother had offered. Successful, her mother's word, which could mean anything from a mid-level accountant with good table manners to someone genuinely formidable, thoughtful, more alarming. Because her mother tended to apply it to men who spoke slowly and expected to be listened to. Not at all like the others, Clara had decided, in the interest of self-preservation, to expect someone adequately pleasant, adequately accomplished, and adequately unsuited to her in all the ways that mattered. She would be polite, she would be present, she would be home by 9:30. The private room held 4 tables, only one of which was occupied. The man seated there had his back to her. She registered broad shoulders, a dark jacket that fit well, posture that was neither stiff nor careless. The manager, not a host, the actual manager, stepped forward to pull out her chair and addressed the back of the man's head with a quiet, "Sir, your guest has arrived." The man turned around. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 3 seconds. To Clara, it felt considerably longer. She knew that face. She knew the set of those shoulders. She knew the calm, attentive eyes that were now watching her with an expression that was composed but not entirely without the quality of a man watching a situation become complicated. He was wearing a charcoal jacket over a simple dark shirt. His hair no longer flattened by rain. He looked entirely different from the man who had crouched beside her engine with a wrench and a cloth. And yet the recognition was immediate and complete, and landed in Clara's stomach like a stone dropped from a great height. She did not sit down. "You," she said. It came out quieter than she intended. He held her gaze without flinching. "Hello again," he said. His composure was not the composure of a man caught in something. It was the composure of a man who had expected exactly this moment and had already decided how to move through it. Which made it worse. Clara set her bag on the table with more care than was strictly necessary. "You followed me here," she said. A muscle moved briefly at the corner of his mouth. "I was already here," he said. "I had a reservation." "The same one you have." The pieces were rearranging themselves in Clara's mind, with the uncomfortable urgency of a picture finally resolving the blind date. The maintenance uniform. The orange vest in the rain. The question, "Are you sure you want to go to this dinner?" from a man who already knew the answer because he was the dinner. "You set this up," she said flatly. "My mother set this up," he said. "And yours?" "About 3 months ago." He paused. "My name is Ethan Callaway." He said it the way people say things that are simply true and require no additional decoration. Clara sat down, not because she had decided to, but because her legs made the calculation that standing was no longer the most useful configuration. Then a server passed their table and murmured, "Good evening, sir," with a small, deferential nod that was entirely out of proportion to refilling a breadbasket. And Clara felt the picture in her mind shift again, the way a camera shifts when you realize the thing in focus is not actually the subject of the photograph. The service continued to be unusual in all the ways that compound quietly until they become undeniable. Not theatrical precise. The sommelier came to the table rather than sending a junior staff member. The bread arrived without being requested. The lighting at their table was fractionally warmer than anywhere else in the room, which was the kind of detail that is invisible until you start looking for it, and then becomes impossible to unsee. Small, attentive calibrations that added up to something. Clara, who dealt in brand experience for a living, recognized as deliberate and specific, and not at all extended to the surrounding tables. She watched Ethan receive all of it with the ease of a man who had long since stopped noticing the attention, not arrogance, simply familiarity with a texture that had become invisible through repetition. He held his menu without looking at it because he had already looked at it before she arrived. "You've been here before," she said. "A few times," he said, and turned a page of the menu without offering more. Clara set her menu down. She had decided that politeness was a less useful tool than directness. "I want to understand what's happening tonight," she said. "What would you like to understand?" he asked. "Why you were pushing a cleaning cart in the rain 2 hours ago," she said, "and now you're sitting in a private dining room where the restaurant manager personally pours your wine." He studied her for a moment. Then he closed his menu. "What if I told you I was actually a janitor?" he said, not defensively, with genuine curiosity, as though he wanted to watch the answer form in real time. Clara felt the question like a small test she had not been told about. She was quiet for longer than was comfortable. "I'd ask you to explain the sommelier," she said finally. He almost smiled. "Fair," he said. A group arrived in the main dining room, expensive clothing, the confident noise of people accustomed to good restaurants. One of the men glanced into the private room as he passed, and his gaze found Ethan. Something happened in the man's expression, a specific readjustment, a fractional nod that bordered on a bow. Ethan returned it with the minimal, unhurried nod of someone who had received a routine courtesy and had already moved on. He said nothing. He did not explain. Clara watched all of this with the careful attention she applied to everything she did not yet understand. Then Ethan excused himself to take a call, and Clara watched him leave, and when she looked back at the table, she noticed the brief glint of something near the edge of his jacket pocket, the geometric edge of a key fob. The kind attached to the sort of vehicle that was not discussed in terms of price, but in terms of which waiting list you were on. She looked at the key fob. She looked at the door through which he had left. She looked at the manager, who was standing at a discreet distance, with the particular attentiveness of someone whose job tonight was not to manage the room, but to manage one table in it. She thought about the way the entire room oriented toward Ethan, the way a plant orients toward a light source. Not obviously, not dramatically, but consistently, as though the direction were simply the natural one. She thought about the way he had sat in that booth seat, with the same ease with which he had crouched in front of her engine. She thought about his grandfather, and the $40, and the 11 years of office buildings, and what it meant that a man like this had spent a decade learning to see himself through other people's eyes without letting it define him. She was not yet sure what to do with any of it, but she was no longer bored. Over the next 30 minutes, what had begun as mutual suspicion acquired the character of a negotiation. Two intelligent people, feeling for the shape of each other's positions without committing to their own. Clara was direct by training and temperament. 7 years in marketing, having trained her to identify the load-bearing element in any argument and apply pressure there. Ethan was different. He argued from observation, from small patient accumulations of evidence, in a way that made it difficult to find the seam where he could be pushed. The specificity of his attention was, she would admit only to herself, somewhat disarming. "Success," she said. "Define it." He picked up a piece of bread and considered it, not as a performance of thoughtfulness but as a genuine pause. "Getting through the day as someone your younger self would recognize," he said. She looked at him. "That's a comfortable definition," she said. "It doesn't require very much." "It requires more than most people think," he said. "Staying recognizable to yourself is hard work. Most people drift. They make compromises they call temporary, and then look up 10 years later and don't know the person in the mirror." Clara thought of 3 people she knew personally to whom this applied exactly, and did not say so. "And you?" she said. "Do you recognize yourself?" He met her eyes. "Most days," he said. "Not all of them." She pressed forward. "You let me think you were a janitor," she said. "You thought it before I said anything," he replied. She opened her mouth and closed it. He continued, without cruelty. "The uniform. The cart. The neighborhood. You had the evaluation done in about 3 seconds. That's not," she started. "Human nature," he said, and offered it back to her with a very slight, very dry inflection that made clear he remembered her using it on the sidewalk. Clara felt the heat of being precisely understood. "But I wasn't trying to embarrass you," he continued, his voice losing its dryness. "I wanted to know whether there was a person in there who could get past the first 3 seconds. He paused. "You told me to go ahead and try. When I offered to look at the engine, you didn't want to say yes, but you did. That counted for something. He told her then about his grandfather, a man who had arrived in this country with $40 and a work visa and cleaned office buildings for 11 years. A man who could have discussed yield curves on 3 different bond markets, but never put that on his work shirt because it wasn't relevant to the job. He said it with the quiet reverence of someone who has spent years measuring other things against a standard set long before they were old enough to understand what they were measuring against. People treated him like furniture mostly, Ethan said. He used to say it was information. The way people treated him told him exactly what he needed to know about them. Clara absorbed this and felt the specific discomfort of recognizing herself in the category of people who provided unflattering information without realizing they were doing it. She looked at her plate. She thought about the way the word had formed in her mind, before she had even made a conscious decision, the category, the assessment, the dismissal, dressed up as practical judgment. "I'm sorry," she said. It came out before she had planned it, which meant it was real. Ethan looked at her. He nodded once, slowly, and there was nothing triumphant in it. "Thank you," he said, and meant it. Their food arrived. Ethan thanked each person who placed a dish, by name, without looking at the name badge. He knew all of them the way people know those they see regularly, not the way people know staff. Clara was filing this alongside everything else she was collecting when Ethan's phone moved on the table, and his expression shifted not dramatically, but in the way a window changes when a cloud crosses behind it. He pressed the phone face down, looked at it for another beat, then excused himself with a brevity that suggested whoever was calling was not someone he could defer. Clara watched him leave and noticed, in the absence of conversation, how much space he had been filling in the room. She gave him 3 minutes and then stood up and followed, telling herself she was stretching her legs. Through a gap at the end of the service hallway, she saw him in the corridor beyond, phone to his ear, one hand braced against the bare concrete wall, speaking in the low-clipped register of someone managing something complicated. A young man in a pressed jacket appeared at the far end of the corridor with a garment bag over one arm and a leather portfolio in the other. Ethan nodded. The young man held the garment bag open, and Ethan, still on the phone, shrugged off his jacket and was handed in its place something that Clara recognized, even from a distance, as belonging to a completely different tax bracket. She walked back to the private room, sat down, and looked at the seat across from her. She flagged down the manager. She asked her question quietly and with the directness of a woman who had already decided she could handle the answer. The manager moved through several professional calculations before concluding that the information was already available elsewhere. "Mr. Callaway," he said, with the care of someone ensuring the name was heard correctly, "is one of the owners of the Callaway Group." He paused. "This restaurant is one of 37 properties." Clara sat alone in a private room that belonged to the man she had offered 2 $50 bills on a rainy sidewalk, and felt the full architectural precision of the situation settle around her like a building finding its foundations. When Ethan returned, he was in the upgraded jacket. He sat down across from her without comment. "Callaway Group," she said. He nodded once, as though confirming something they had both known for a while. 37 properties, she added. 38, he said quietly. "We closed on one in Portland last month." She looked at the ceiling briefly, then back at him. The composure was intact, but she could see beneath it. Now, the small, vigilant attention of a man who has disclosed something that mattered and is watching to see what happens next. "So, you tried me," she said. His expression shifted not defensively, but with the concentration of someone choosing words carefully. "I wanted to know who you were before you knew who I was," he said. "I've had enough of the other version, the one where everything is known before you've said a single honest word to each other." He was leaning forward slightly now, the armor of composure thinned by something more worn. "Do you think I'm worth sitting across from now?" Clara set down her wine glass. Something in her chest was doing a complicated thing she was not going to name right now. "That's an unfair question," she said. "Most important ones are," he said. Ethan told her then about the 11 dinners. 11 of these exact arrangements, each one set up with the best intentions and the same fundamental problem. "The first thing that happened every time," he said, "was a recalibration. Somewhere between the coat check and the table, something in their posture changed. And then the performance began. Not badly performed, well performed, which was what made it so airless. He said the word as though he had been living in a closed room for years and had gradually forgotten that rooms were supposed to have windows. Clara listened without interrupting. She had come to this dinner prepared to dislike him for a roster of reasons assembled in advance from nothing, and she was aware, now, of the specific shape of the irony that the most genuine version of herself she had produced all week had been on a wet sidewalk talking to a man she thought was a janitor. "I was engaged once," he said, and set the sentence down with the weight of a thing that had been carried too long. 3 years ago. 2 years together before that. He had believed the relationship had survived long enough to be real. It turned out the survival was the performance. After the second hotel sold and the third acquisition closed, the conversation changed, not dramatically, but the weight of things shifted. The future she had been quietly planning reconfigured itself around his assets rather than around him. He said it without bitterness. Clara recognized that as a significant accomplishment, and also as a sign of grief processed past its anger, the specific exhaustion that comes after the heat has gone, and left behind only the clear, cold understanding of what happened. There was no drama in the telling, no invitation to sympathy, just the plain recounting of a fact that had permanently altered the coordinates of how he moved through the world. It had not made him cynical. Exactly, cynicism was easier, required less precision, allowed you to stop looking. What it had made him was careful, in a way that caring people sometimes are after they have been hurt, not by accident, but by design. After that, he said, the maintenance rounds started. Early mornings, honest work with honest feedback. A thing either worked or it didn't. You could tell immediately. He turned his water glass slowly on the tablecloth, and the observation the uniform came later, because I needed to see what I was looking at before the context contaminated it. He looked at her. If you had known from the beginning tonight, the car, all of it, if you had known who I was from the first second, would any of it have been different? Clara held his gaze honestly, because he had earned that. She was quiet for long enough that the answer was the answer. Yes, she said. It would have been different. He absorbed this. Me too, he said. That's the problem with all of it. It would have been different for both of us. A pause, and then, which makes me think we should try again. From somewhere closer to the beginning. Clara looked at him. Then she picked up her napkin, set it on the table, and stood up. She left because the evening had applied more pressure than she had capacity for in a single sitting, and because the thing building behind her eyes was not something she was prepared to do in front of Ethan Callaway or anyone else in a restaurant with 37 properties and a carefully attentive manager. She excused herself, collected her coat, and walked through the rain to her car. She sat behind the wheel in the dark and let herself feel the vertigo of an evening that had dismantled several things she had been comfortable carrying. She thought about the way she had looked at his uniform and made her calculation. She thought about how he had said, "It would have been different for both of us," and the equality in that sentence, the complete absence of accusation, the shared weight of it, two people equally implicated in the same problem. She thought about how long she had used the performance of confidence as a substitute for the actual thing, and how the actual thing, when she had briefly produced it on a wet sidewalk, had been seen and recorded and held carefully by a stranger who was not, as it turned out, a stranger. Then the engine clicked and died. She looked at the ignition. She looked at the ceiling. She said the word she had used earlier. And then she said it again. And then, despite everything, the ache and the vertigo and the accumulated weight of the last 3 hours, she began to laugh. She was still laughing, softly and somewhat desperately, when she saw headlights pull up behind her. She watched in the side mirror as a figure stepped out. No janitor's cart, no safety vest, just the dark jacket and the steady, unhurried walk she recognized without needing to see the face. Ethan came up alongside her window and tapped on the glass once. She lowered it. Rain was beating on the shoulders of his jacket. "Same battery terminal," she said. "Probably," he said, and was already walking around to the front of the car. Clara got out and walked around to where he was working and stood beside him in the rain, holding the flashlight on her phone over the engine so he could see what he was doing. He glanced at her briefly, with the same quality of attention with which he had registered the grease-stained sleeve. She held the light steady. The rain came down between them, and neither of them moved away from it. "First time you fixed this," she said. "What did you think when you saw me standing there?" He considered the question without deflecting. "I thought you were afraid," he said. "Not of the car. Of wherever you were going. I thought you were someone who had gotten very good at moving forward even when you didn't want to." His hands moved efficiently in the engine. "What did you think of me?" he said. She owed him the equivalent. "I thought you were kind," she said. "I didn't want to think that, so I filed it under pity and moved on." He was quiet for a moment. "I thought about following you into the restaurant," he said. "Before I knew, it was the same place. I thought it was a shame that someone that precise and that frightened was going to walk into a room and perform her way through another evening alone." The engine turned over and caught. Clara lowered her phone. They were standing close in the rain, the engine ticking quietly between them, the city moving around them with the impersonal continuity of cities at night. "There's a diner," he said. "About 4 blocks from here. Coffee that is genuinely terrible, and pie that is genuinely excellent." He paused. No sommelier. No manager. No private room. Clara looked at him. "No uniform either," she said. "I'm off the clock," he said. She almost smiled. "The 38 properties," she started. "Not tonight," he said quietly. "Tonight, I'm just Ethan." She studied him for a moment, this man who had fixed her car twice in one evening, who had asked whether she was sure before she knew why the question mattered, who had described his grandfather's $40 work visa with the same careful precision with which he managed a hospitality empire, who had catalogued a single small moment of ordinary human decency and held it against the whole weight of her behavior like something worth saving. "Okay," she said. "Okay, Ethan." He closed the hood and looked at her in the rain. "Leave the car," he said. "I'll have someone look at it properly in the morning." She raised an eyebrow. "One of your properties have a mechanic?" 38.5, he said. And the dry humor was so precisely calibrated that she laughed again, clean, unguarded, entirely unlike anything she had produced in the private dining room. The evening opened up into something that felt, for the first time, like the beginning of something rather than the endurance of something. They walked 4 blocks in the rain, not touching, occasionally almost touching, talking about nothing that mattered and meaning everything. The diner was everything he had described and nothing more, which turned out to be exactly right. Formica counters, booth seats with vinyl, repaired by slightly mismatched tape, a pie display case under fluorescent light that made the cherry-filling look almost alarmingly red. The coffee arrived in mugs, not cups. Ethan wrapped both hands around his and looked at it with the undisguised appreciation of a man who had been in the other restaurant for too long. Clara looked at him across the table and thought, "This is who he actually is, not the other jacket. Not the deference of 38 restaurant managers. This. The unhurried ease, the attentiveness without performance." She thought about how rarely she met that in anyone, and how much longer it had taken her than it should have to see it. "I have a question," she said. He looked up from his coffee. "You can have several," he said. "Do you actually enjoy it?" she asked. "The disguise, the observation exercise. Does it give you what you want, or is it a story you tell yourself to justify not trusting people?" The question was sharper than she intended. He sat with it, and he did not deflect. "Both," he said honestly, after a moment. "Mostly it gives me genuine information. People behave differently when they think no one important is watching. You see the real load-bearing structure of who they are." He paused. "And yes, sometimes it's probably a story. A way to stay one step removed and call it strategy rather than fear." He looked at her steadily. "You told me something true just now," she said. "It would have been easier not to. You asked honestly," he said. "You've been asking honestly all night, even when you were being difficult about it." "I'm usually difficult about it," she said. "I know," he said. "You were honest about that too." They ordered pie. Clara told him about her first week in marketing, 23 years old, walking into a conference room where everyone was older and better dressed, and she had the distinct sensation of being an imposter who had wandered into a room meant for someone more qualified. She had built an entire personal mythology around never letting them see her uncertain. She had maintained it so consistently and so successfully that at some point the mythology became the only architecture available. The scaffolding had been up so long it had calcified into load-bearing wall, and the person underneath had gotten so practiced at waiting behind it that she had almost stopped expecting to be called on at all. He listened without interrupting, which was rarer than it should have been, and which she noticed. When she finished, he said, "You stopped being uncertain? Or you stopped letting anyone see it?" She looked at the table. "The second one," she said. He nodded slowly. "That's the lonelier version," he said quietly. "Yes," she said. "It is." There was a silence that was not uncomfortable, the silence of two people sitting with something true rather than hurrying past it. He refilled her terrible coffee without asking, which she registered as one of those small details that arrives without announcement and leaves a disproportionate impression. He told her about the year after his engagement ended, not the grief itself, which he had processed past the point of retelling, but the specific texture of the year. Waking before 4 in the morning, the maintenance rounds, the honest work. He had started going to the facilities of his hotels to move through the building with the overnight crew because a thing either worked or it didn't, and you could tell immediately, and he had needed that clarity more than he had needed anything the boardroom could offer him. He had found, he said, that honest work was the only thing that didn't require him to perform anything in order to get the real answer. The building either held or it didn't. The wiring either ran clean or it didn't. There was no version of the building that was behaving the way it behaved, because it knew who he was. "I think I understand that," Clara said. He looked at her. "I think you do," he said. She thought about her grandfather's advice, fix the thing in front of you, and understood, for the first time, that what it really meant was also this. Pay attention to what is actually there, not the category, not the uniform, not the performance of either of you. The actual person, doing the actual thing. In the actual rain, Clara looked at him across the Formica table and the terrible coffee, and said, "I owe you an apology. On the street tonight, I was condescending. And I knew it even while I was doing it. Telling myself it was first impression calibration makes it worse, not better." He looked at her steadily and nodded once. "I owe you one too," he said. "The test wasn't fair. It asked something of you that you didn't know you were being asked." Clara considered this. "Maybe," she said, "but I failed it anyway." "You passed the part that mattered," he said. She thought again about the grease on the sleeve, the glance, the 3-second window in which she had been more herself than she usually managed. He had seen it. He had held it. He had weighed it against everything else and found it sufficient. She did not know entirely what to do with that. She was beginning to think she would have some time to figure it out. He paid for the pie with cash, counted from his wallet, with the habitual ease of a man who paid for things himself. He left a tip that was thoughtful without being ostentatious. Outside the diner, the rain had thinned to a mild drizzle. They stood on the sidewalk, and Ethan looked at her with the attentive calm she now understood was not detachment but concentration, a specific, directed quality of presence that she suspected very few people received from him without performance attached. "If you want to see me again," she said, "I'd like that. But not in a private dining room. And not with a cover story." He looked at her for a long moment, and something moved in his expression that was neither the composure of the restaurant nor the dry humor of the diner, but something more unguarded than either. "No cover stories," he said. "And not a private dining room." He paused. "There is, however, a rooftop." She raised an eyebrow. "One of your properties?" "Excellent view. Mediocre food," he said. "No sommelier." "I'll consider it," she said. He smiled then fully, without editing. And it was, she thought, a very good smile. She walked back to her car in the drizzle, and he walked beside her. And the distance between them was already in the process of becoming something else. Several weeks passed. The city moved through the remainder of autumn and into the particular gray pleasantness of early winter, when the afternoons are brief and the coffee shops fill early, and everything feels quietly significant in ways that are difficult to explain and easy to lose. Clara had changed in the way people change when they have been shown something true about themselves and chosen, rather than deflecting it, to do something useful with the information. She was less quick to perform the first impression, not because she had stopped observing, which was too deeply wired into her to abandon, but because she had started extending the window. She let the second and third impressions have a voice. She noticed when she was being managed toward a conclusion before she had gathered enough data to reach one herself. She found, with a consistency that surprised her, that the world became slightly more interesting when you assumed less about it. Ethan, for his part, had not entirely abandoned the habit that had started with his grandfather's stories and solidified into something more deliberate. He still moved through his properties in ordinary clothes, observing, listening, noting the things that a building's official reporting structure tended to smooth over. He still found the honest work grounding in a way the boardroom rarely was. But now, sometimes, when he made his early morning rounds, there was someone walking beside him. Clara had come the first time out of curiosity, arriving in practical clothes and asking accurate questions and offering one observation about the lobby lighting that the design consultant had not caught and that Ethan had acted on the following week. After that, it became, without either of them formally deciding it, a regular thing. They moved through kitchens and service corridors and loading docks in the quiet hours before the day fully assembled itself. Both of them privately agreed, the most honest version of most mornings they had experienced in a long time. On a Tuesday in early December, they were in the kitchen level of the downtown property when a delivery was being unloaded. One of the kitchen staff, a young man, perhaps 20, moving efficiently through a heavy workload, stopped to hold a door open for a guest who had wandered into the service corridor. The guest walked through without acknowledging it. Then he stopped, looked back, and said something dismissive about using the right entrance. The young man absorbed the comment with the practiced stillness of someone who had been absorbing versions of it for years and had long since decided that his dignity was not conditional on whether anyone else was conferring it. Clara had already turned around. Ethan watched her cross the corridor with the purposeful step of someone who has made a calculation and has no uncertainty about it. She did not raise her voice. She stood beside the young man and looked at the guest and said, in a tone of complete conversational normalcy, that the young man had been holding the door and a thank you was customary. She said it as though it were a mild point of general interest. The guest recalibrated, said something defensive, and left. The young man looked at Clara. She said something quiet to him. Then she walked back to Ethan, who was watching her from across the corridor with an expression he was not trying to manage. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "You're doing the face again," she said. "What face?" "The one where you've decided something but you're going to make me wait for it." He looked at her. "I think you're someone my younger self would recognize," he said quietly. She understood exactly what he meant, the callback to his answer across the dinner table. The definition of success that was really a definition of integrity, of staying legible to the person you started as. "That's quite a thing to say," she said. "I mean it," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm working on deserving it." He held her gaze. "You already do," he said. "I'm just learning to say it directly." She raised an eyebrow. "Growth," she said. "Don't push it," he said. She laughed, and the sound echoed in the bare service corridor. Easy and unguarded, and entirely unlike the composed Clara of the restaurant's private room, and he found that sound the best thing he had heard in a long while. One evening, walking along the river path with the city's lights reflected amber in the water and their breath visible in the cold air, Clara reached over and pulled his sleeve lightly. He stopped. She looked at him. "You know you can stop now," she said. He tilted his head, knowing what she meant. "The early mornings," she said. "The maintenance rounds." The orange vest. She let that hang in the air for a moment, not unkindly. You found her. She paused, and then because she was Clara and could not have been herself without it, added, unless you enjoy it. He looked at her with the full, unhurried attentiveness she had come to recognize as his version of being entirely present, the particular quality of attention that did not skim the surface of a thing, but settled into it. I do enjoy it, he said. Good, she said. Then I'll keep coming with you. He was quiet for a moment, looking out at the river, at the long amber smear of the city lights bending in the current. You know, he said, at some point, you're going to suggest the lighting again, and I'm going to have to explain to my design team why a marketing director is making structural facility recommendations. Senior marketing director, she said. And I was right about the lobby. He looked at her. She looked at him. The river moved beside them, amber and unhurried, carrying the city's reflection downstream into the dark, and neither of them said what both of them knew, because some things are better understood than stated, and some acknowledgments are more complete without words than they ever could be with them. He reached over and took her hand the way he had taken it the first night outside the diner, without ceremony, without declaration, as a simple, honest acknowledgement of where they were. She let him, and they walked on along the river in the quiet, early dark of a December evening, two people who had met in the least romantic possible circumstances and had managed, through stubbornness and honesty and a battery terminal that kept coming loose in the rain, to find their way to something real. Clara thought, not for the first time, about the particular strangeness of it, the chain of small contingencies that had assembled themselves into this. 120 minutes from roadside assistance. No one else's had stopped. If the cart hadn't been going past at exactly that moment, if she had been colder, or he had been less patient, or if the grease had landed anywhere other than her sleeve at the exact second she was paying attention. She did not say any of this out loud, but she held it the way you hold things that feel improbably lucky, carefully, without gripping. The city moved around them with its ordinary indifference to significance. A few blocks away, in a restaurant that belonged to one of them, a sommelier was opening a bottle for guests who did not know whose name was on the deed. Somewhere in a storage room in that same building, a safety vest hung on a hook beside a mop handle, and two people walked beside a river in the cold December dark and said nothing. And the nothing was full of everything, and it was more than enough.